What's up, everybody? Today's the day. I've had a few of you asking for me to do a video on making these expansion battery cables for the Pecron unit, Pecron systems, whatever you want to call it. I think they're all about the same. So this is where the factory expansion batteries plug into. I've got these MJ32 connectors, and the main thing to pay attention to is negative on this side, positive on that side. And this is what I'm choosing to run, these eco-worthy Gen 3 server rack batteries. And you can use whatever battery you want, and this will give you the freedom to do that and have some what I'm going to call non-proprietary battery expansion capabilities. So I'm going to go out to our little workstation out here. The dogs are out and about. So, I'm off-grid for context in case you've never seen the channel before. And this is my off-grid solar system. So we got just some real simple stuff here. I got this package where I've got the MJ32 connector. I have a hydraulic crimper and some power wire and connectors, a torch for doing the shrink wrap, a marker, and a razor blade. Like, this is all just basic stuff, no real crazy special tools or anything. So let's go ahead and get started on just doing a quick little video on how to make your own cables to whatever your specifications are. All right, well, let's get started with this project. I decided to just kind of do this in a point of view fashion to where it's a good viewing angle, similar to what you have doing your own project. I've never used this crimper tool before. This is the first time I'm seeing it. I've crimped wires before with just the hand tools, but I've never used a hydraulic crimper. Now, there's different style crimpers that you can use or choose, if you know what I'm saying. But this one, to me, for I guess it was like $39.90 something, seemed like it was the best value. There's ones that go in a vise that you have to hit with a hammer, and I was like, if you had to do what I'm going to call a bush fix, like my neighbor has an excavator that needs some new battery cables, I can use this out in the woods to make a new battery cable. I don't need a vise or anything like that. So I felt like this would be the most versatile, useful wire crimper in this context for doing heavy stuff. Now, this one will do from 4mm or 12 AWG all the way up to 70mm or 00 AWG. So that's a really wide range. I feel like this could be a very useful tool. I personally may not use something like this for a 4mm or 12 AWG wire, but I mean, if the crimp quality is better than what you would have with a pair of hand tools, then maybe I would. Now, the way this works is you can see there's a bunch of different dies in there. You put the dies that you need for the particular wire size that you're using into this tool. And there's that knob there, which basically either allows it to build pressure when you're pumping it up, and then the other one, like turning it the other way, allows it to let pressure out. So, like I said, this is the first time that I'm seeing this tool in person. This is the first time I'm using a tool like this. So I wanted this video to be similar to what your personal experience would be making your own cables, or just doing a general project like this if you've never done something like this before. Okay, let's move on to this connector. Now, this is intended for creating an entire plug, meaning like a male and female side. We're only using the side that you saw in the video. Like, we're not using that end. That would basically, be what I'm going to call on either Well, I guess you could make it either way. That could be the load side, that could be the supply side. But at any rate, we're not using those items, so we're just going to set those off to the side. And there's some screws that go with that too. We don't need those either. All we really need is this connector itself. I'm going to take this apart and set it down in the order and direction that it comes apart. Yeah, it's pretty important. The good news is if you make a mistake when you're putting this together, because of the way this assembles, you're not going to do what I'm going to refer to as, damage any single-use items. Now, notice I'm getting ready to make a mistake here with the way I put that connector down. When I originally made these, I made a mistake. I'm marking the negative side with this permanent marker. That way I know, no matter how many times I flip this thing around, which side the negative wire goes on. Because I made that mistake when I was making my cables originally, and I just wanted to include that in the video so that way you didn't get confused and end up, having to take it apart, put it back together. It's not the end of the world, but nobody likes making mistakes. It can be frustrating or disappointing, but I include all my mistakes in these videos because we're all human beings and we're doing new things and learning how to do things, and not everything goes perfect, and I think it's important to highlight that. You might do this and feel dumb or inadequate, and that's not the case. You're learning, you're a human being, you may make some mistakes. As long as you don't burn the house down, everything's cool. So that's where I'm at on that. Now we're going to start putting these components, sliding them over the wire in the order and the direction that they originally came apart in. If you struggle with keeping things straight, maybe draw yourself a diagram or take some pictures and look at your phone. Now, I just slid that part on backwards, and that's okay. Like I said, I'm including the mistakes in the videos. We're just going to keep it real here. And this step that I'm doing right now is not necessary, but I'm choosing to do this. These are just, little pieces of the 4-gauge shrink wrap. So I'm installing these on, and I'll show you why in a second. I had forgot my screwdriver, so there's a little cut there in the video. Now, these are I'm going to call them terminals. So you're gonna strip the wire back and slide these over top of the 4-gauge wire, and when you tighten the 2 screws on the connector down, it basically crushes these into the wire and gives you a really good strong connection. You could basically just strip these, and so you see I'm taking the marker, I'm marking the wire now. Now I'm marking where the end of this connector lands on this wire. This 4-gauge wire that I have, these things don't slide over the insulator, so I basically have to have a portion that would normally slide over the insulator butt up against the insulator, and I choose to do the shrink wrap around that. But you'll get a better look at that in a second. But you could install these without the connectors and just let the screws, latch onto the cable. But I think that this is a far superior connection than doing that, which is important. It's very important to have tight connections. Loose connections will cause increased resistance, which creates heat. It's pretty important to make sure that you have good tight connections. Always make sure that your crimps are tight. Give them a little jerk. Make sure that they're snug. So now we're sliding this connector over the 4-gauge wire, and you want to make sure that you get all the strands in and they're not sticking out. Maybe if one's sticking out, just wrap it around the insulator and get it out of the way. And then if you look, I don't know if you can see it in the camera now, but the wire reaches the end of the connector. and we're just going to hit it with the torch. Now that torch is overkill for this, but my butane one is out of gas, so we're just using that. And then we're just kind of rinse and repeat here. Like I said, this connector normally should slide over the insulator, but the outside diameter of my insulator is too big for it to slide over. So I'm just butting it up against the insulator and then shrink wrapping around the outside of that, so that way there's no chance of having any exposed wires or short circuits. It's probably overkill, probably unnecessary, but it's just a very small step to take in the prevention end of things. Alright, we're just going to start unscrewing the screws on this connector. They come screwed all the way in. I suppose the intention is so that way they don't kind of vibrate out and fall out into the box and potentially go missing. We marked that with a marker, so we knew that was the side the ground wire went on. Very quick, easy thing to do. I snugged the outside one first and then the inside one. That way, sometimes when you're tightening screws, the turning will kind of push a connector out. You don't want that to happen, so we're keeping an eye on that. And we're not going super duper crazy on this. We've got that 4-gauge wire in there, and that connector works as like a crush sleeve over it. We're going to take these things down till they're kind of snug and just go back and forth a couple times, because this is what I'm going to call a crush connection. Giving it a little tug, making sure it's tight, and it is, and then we're just going to repeat this process again. Alright, so whatever those, gave them a good double check. We're giving it a nice good tug on there. You don't want to get too crazy, but you do want to make sure that, like, if somebody tripped over a wire or whatever, it's not going to pull out and create a short circuit, cause a fire. Now, I'm going to put this together, and I can tell that something's not right. Remember earlier I said I put that connector on backwards, and I did. So we're going to go ahead and take this back apart and get that on in the correct direction. Now I just showed you that connector and gave you the thumbs up. If you zoom in on your screen, or maybe you're able to see better on your TV or your iPad or something, you could see where the screws had made good indentations in there, and it's going to really hold these things securely. So now what I'm doing is, making another mistake. I thought that my mistake was it was on in the right direction, but this thing slid into that, and then the other piece screwed in. So now I'm technically, putting it back together and this is not the way it goes. But the good news is, and this is what I was saying earlier, that when you turn the screws into that connector, it basically kind of crushes a circular pattern in from the screw, and all you have to do is basically put the screws back into where they crushed in. And this is what I'm going to refer to as like a multiple use connector. As long as you screw the screws back in where they were originally, you could take this thing apart and put it back together numerous times. So if you make a couple of mistakes like what I did here on camera, it's okay, as long as you do what I said, put the screws back where they came out of, and you can take this thing apart and put it back together as many times as you want, and it's not going to create any issues. So my thought was, oh, this thing slides over from the outside, and then I realized that that's not actually the case. This piece that I just took off, it needs to slide on from the other direction. So that's why I said it's important to either take pictures or draw a diagram or something. But I'm noticing now that this thing has to slide over from the wire side. It's facing the right direction now, but I've got to take it back apart again and slide it over the wire. So again, I'm showing the mistakes. You might do this when you're putting it together, you're excited or nervous or whatever, and you're just not paying enough attention. So obviously I've been monkeying around with this thing for a minute. The issue that I'm having is that piece seemed to be kind of stuck onto the connector, and I was like trying to see, is it got a screw loose? I just kind of had to pull a little bit harder. There's a fine line between not pulling hard enough and pulling too hard, so I always try to be careful. You don't want to break stuff, so that's why we were kind of screwing around there for a little longer than I needed to. All right, we got it on the run now. You can see that that thing slid into place. The negative wire is on the correct side. I've snugged that up. You could put a wrench on that, but I think that, because it's a plastic connector, tightening it with a wrench is probably a little overkill. Now we're sliding this rubber grommet back up on there. And I'm kind of like a fit and finish Nazi, if you know what I'm saying. So I'm making sure that when the connector is connected to the unit, that the wires are completely parallel and even, if you know what I'm saying. That way it's not like twisted and the negative's kind of slightly on the bottom or on the top. So I've got that all snugged up. We're giving it a nice little tug, making sure that everything's good, no loose stuff. The connector is you know, functioning normal. So everything's good to go here now. We're going to go on to the other end of things where we're going to be using our new hydraulic crimper, and we're going to be crimping these lugs on. Now, when I bought this kit of wiring that you're seeing here, I've already used obviously a good bit of the wire to make the other two connectors, but they give you, I think it's 25 foot of power and 25 foot of ground. It's obviously same 4-gauge wire, just, you know, one's red and one's black. But it came with a whole bunch of these different lugs. Now we're going to, and also the shrink wrap that I'm sliding over. So we're sliding the shrink wrap over the wires. We're going to, you know, get it back considerably, you know, from the end, so it's just out of the way. And then you're going to select, you know, the lugs that are, I mean, obviously they're a 4-gauge lug, but you want the I guess I'm going to call it the lug size to whatever battery you're connecting to. You want that to be the appropriate size. And now I'm marking these wires for what I'm going to call my strip depth, how much insulator I need to strip off, and make sure the wire is, you know, completely into the connector itself, but then also not to where we have bare wire hanging out of the back side of the connector. There's kind of just a fine line there. So that's what we're doing right now. And I'm just kind of twisting these wires to where they're not going to be poking out of the edges. And, you know, take a little time and do that. And then we're going to slide these over and make sure that we get the wire completely into the connector without bottoming out onto the insulator. And then we're going to go ahead and get these things crimped up. I think personally getting this thing close and then sticking it in there and doing it's the way to go. So let's get started with that. All right, you can see I was kind of fumbling around there. The issue that I was having was I was using the 25 millimeter die, and I was crimping it, but the die was just too big, so the wire was falling out of the back. It was crimping the lug just a little bit, but not enough to actually, compress the connector enough where the wire would hold tight. So, I decided that, obviously this isn't working. We're going to need a different die. So we're getting the kit back out here, and they give you a chart that tells you what die to use. They show a diagram in the white section where, they show you different accesses. And I guess what I should have been using, depending on, I guess, the lug that you're using, you're either going to be on an A or a B axis. So you'd either be using a 7.25 millimeter die or a 10.25 millimeter die. And the 7.25 seems way too small just looking at it. And the 10, there is no 10.25, there's just a 10. That looked too small to me also. So I decided to just go rogue. Just to look at it, the 25 millimeter looked like it was probably the right one. And the next size down from the 25 millimeter was the 16 millimeter. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to try the 16 millimeter. And let's see if this is the correct one for the 4-gauge lugs that I'm using. So I kind of was like, this is awkward. So I decided that putting the 4-gauge lug into the die, compressing it to the point to where it held itself in the die, but it wasn't crushing, was going to be a lot better. Then I could just take and slide the wire into the backside and then start the crimping process. So like I said, this is the first time I've ever used this tool. So maybe you want to just give that a try. You know, get the die out that you think you're going to need, put the connector in there to where it holds the connector. Now this isn't, it's compressed it some, but not enough. So, you know, going against what the chart said apparently was the wrong decision. The 16 compressed it some, but I could still slide the wire right out of the back. So I'm just kind of looking at this stuff for comparison, and it seems that the 10 millimeter die is going to be the correct one. So I'm installing the 10 millimeter dies in here now, and I'm getting this thing to a point to where I can just get the connector to hold tight. Now the wire did crimp somewhat onto the connector, so this time I just left the connector attached to the wire, and now I'm just going to go ahead and crimp this wire. Now I'm pumping it to a point to where you can feel that, I guess there's a bypass valve in there to where it's breached its max clamping power. It bypasses the fluid. You can hear it kind of going past the bypass valve. So that is a good tight connection. You can see I gave it a nice yank. I'm going to slide that shrink wrap up around the edge of the connector. Give that a zap with a nap gas torch. The little butane torch that I have would be more appropriate, but like I already said, we're out of fuel on that one. So now we know the correct die to use. I'm going to strip this wire. I'm just using the razor blade. If you've got a pair of strippers that will, you know, do 4-gauge and whatever other sizes that you may be stripping, you know, that's obviously the tool to use. But most of us happen to have a razor blade sitting around, so I've got a razor blade, but I don't have a 4-gauge stripper, and I didn't really want to buy one. I was like, I'll just use a razor blade. I'm not going to cut the strands of wire. We're getting that connector or the lug, whatever you want to call it, in the die, centered up, and it's held in there real nice now. It's sturdy. This to me seems like the way to do it. It was awkward the other way. I'm sliding my wire in there, and we're going to start crimping this guy down. You know, easy peasy lemon squeezy, as they say. Experience is everything, and you can see that was very fast and effective once you basically do what I call overcoming the learning curve. So we figured out what die we need for these lugs. Got this thing shrink wrapped. So now this is technically all done. We've got our positive and negative lugs crimped and soldered on, crimped and shrunk wrapped. This is ready to plug into the Pecron unit. So away we go. All right, so now you know the basic techniques on how to make your own expansion battery connectors. You know, this Pecron E36 LFP is a 48 volt system, so choose the 48 volt battery of your choice. You know, it is important that it's a 48 volt battery. Now, some guys that are a little more advanced might take, you know, a number of 12 volt batteries or 24 volt batteries and make a 48 volt circuit, if you know what I'm saying, but I don't want to get too far in the weeds for just the basic beginners. Now, one thing to keep in mind is I would suggest using 4-gauge wire. You know, there's no sense, in my opinion, on skimping down to 6-gauge wire. 4-gauge wire is a thicker, heavier duty wire. That's what EcoWorthy uses for these server racks, if you're going to hook them in series or parallel, whatever it be. So that's what I'm choosing to use. Use your best judgment, but these connectors are made for a 4-gauge wire. And when I say that, if you look at this weatherproof connector, because these are technically meant for a trolling motor. This is technically a watertight connector with this 4-gauge wire. Now, we're indoors. This is not a weatherproof application. If you chose to use 6-gauge because that's all you have and you ordered some 4-gauge, that'll be fine. But you're going to notice that there will be a gap here, and the fact that it's not a weatherproof seal doesn't really matter. But I hope this helps you, and if you want to do like I did and make your own expansion batteries instead of buying the proprietary ones, this will help you facilitate that. So I appreciate you all watching. Drop a comment, subscribe to the channel if you don't mind. It's free. It helps me out. I'm looking to get monetized here, bring you guys some good content if at all possible. But anyhow, I appreciate y'all, and I'll see you all in the next one.